Hello, you're welcome back to my channel. So today we'll be drafting an 8 pieces flay. You know, the 8 pieces flay that is really fitted at the knee and then it flows all the way down, just the way you see on some celebrities. That's what we'll be doing today. So for the 8 pieces flay, I'll be using the length of this paper. So firstly, I'll mark my middle flay allowance. Now on this paper, I'm using 4 inches, but if you're cutting it on the fabric, you can use up to 8, 10 or 15 inches. It depends on how many yards of fabrics you have at your disposal. So that's what I'm marking on this paper right now, and then I'll roll it all the way from the top to the end. Then the next thing I will have to do will be to mark my dart position. Now the dart position can be my nipple to nipple distance divided by 2 plus half, or I can use 1/8 of my waist measurement plus half. That will be my dart position, and that's what I'm marking from the first line that I drew, and then I'm marking all out like you've seen me do. So now for my vertical dimensions, I need to get an horizontal line. That will be the start point for my markings, and I'm marking 6 inches downwards for the hip line, and for my knee line I'm using 13 inches. And at this point I will need to rule the lines, the hip line and the knee line. So now at the hem here, I'll mark out the inches that I want to use for my side flay, and then I'll connect it all the way from the hem to the hip line, and that's the ankle that you can see now, and I'm cutting that out. Now this is our middle front. Okay, so I'm not doing any shaping at this point. I just want to have the block first, and then we'll do the shaping later. So for the side front, I'll need a flay allowance as well for it. So I've marked the flay allowance that I need. That's 4 inches, like I'm using on this paper. Again, you can use up to 8 inches or 15, and then I bring the front bodice and I place it on that allowance line. Okay, so now I can now take out my front circumference. So on the waistline, I'm marking 1/4 of my waist plus 1 inch for that, and 1 inch for seaming allowance. On the hip line, I'm marking 1/4 of my hip circumference plus 1 inch for seaming allowance, and I'm extending those lines so we'll know what we are connecting. On my knee line, I am using my hip divided by 4 circumference minus 1, and that's what I'm marking on the knee line, and I will add 1 inch for my seaming allowance. Now at this point on that line that you've seen me touch, I'll be using the same measurement I have on my knee line. I'll measure it on my hem. Pay close attention. I'm measuring it on my hem, and then I'll take out from that point. I'll take out whatever allowance I need for the flay. That will be for the side flay, for the front bodies. So then I'll connect the flay allowance that I'm adding to the knee line, and I'll cut that out, and that becomes our side front. So then we're moving to the back bodies now. And for the back bodies, I'm cutting the same thing that I cut for the front bodies, the middle front, just that it will be 1 inch or 1.5 inches higher than the front bodies. So I'm cutting it out now. And for the side back, just the way I did for the front, I'm marking out the allowance that I'm going to use for the side flay. And then I'll bring in the middle back and place it on that line that you can see that I use for my flay allowance. So that line now becomes the meeting point for the side front, for the side back, the middle back, and the middle front. So I'm pinning that down, and I'll need to mark out the inches because I cut the same thing as the front. I didn't take out time to rule this out. So I'll mark that out so you can see the allowance line that I'm using for the middle back. So after ruling that out, I'll need to bring my side front at this point. And like I said, the point that you see me place the middle back, that's the same line I will place my side front, just like you can see me do in this video. So I'm placing that, and I will need to align it all the way to the hem. It has to be the same thing. It has to be that line that you're seeing on the side front has to be the meeting point for it on the side back as well. And I'm bringing in my side front and I place it on that same line. Just follow this slowly and closely, and you will understand what I'm trying to say. And if you get this method, this will be the easiest thing, and you have the perfect fitting that you want. So I'm bringing in the middle front, and I have to place it, making sure that everything aligns before I start the contouring proper. So I'm taking out the half inch that I added for the dart. I'll be observing my dart, and I want it to stop 2 inches before my hip line. And after the hip line, I'll go downwards with 2 inches and I'll connect it to the knee line. On the knee line, I took inwards half inch, and at that point of half inch, I'm connecting it to the flare that I added for the middle front. Hope you understand. So I'm cutting that out now. And the next thing I will have to do will be to trace that same new shape that I have for this part now on the side front. But before I do that, I will need to contour the middle front. Now remember, there will be a joining in the middle front, and it must have a flare. So on my center front, I'm going inwards with half inch on my knee line, and I'm connecting that to the hem. I'm leaving about half inches from the flare allowance I added to the middle front, and I'll use 1 inch or 3/4 all the way up. That will be the seaming allowance I'll use for the middle front. So I'm connecting the dot, and I'll connect it all the way to the waistline. And because the hip line is not so sharp, I'm using the cuff part of my pattern master to just blend that out. So I'll be cutting this out. And then at this point, I will need to cut out the side back. This is what I should have done before I started the contouring, but it still doesn't matter, so I'll still need to cut it out at this point. And after cutting this out, I'll need to trace out, like I said, the middle front, the side of the middle front. I'll need to trace it out on the side front itself. That's because so that when you're sewing it, it will not be like forcing a square into a circle. The sewing will follow the same contour, the same shaping, and then you will have a perfect finishing. So I'm tracing that out from the waistline all the way to the hem. And after I've done that, I'll need to remove the pins that I used to pin this down and set the middle front aside. So now extending the knee line. On that knee line, I will need to observe 1 inch as my seaming allowance. Now that seaming allowance will serve as half inch for both sides when you're sewing. So I'm using 1 inch all the way to the waistline. And on that knee line, I will need to take out an ankle to meet the flare allowance that I added. Just watch me do it, exactly that, and then I'll cut this out, and that will be for the side front. Having done this, I will need to pin the side front to the side back. That's because I don't want to remove it entirely, so that when I'm bringing it back, I will not have any confusion. Just like I've brought back the middle front and I'm pinning it down because I want to contour the waistline, and I'll confirm the measurement. You can use this to confirm the waist measurement, your hip measurement. So on my center front, I'm going downwards with half inch, If you've been watching my video on skirt making, I always do this, to have a proper sitting of your skirt on your body. So I'll go downwards on the center front with 1/2 inch and I'll connect it to the waist measurement, and that's what you saw me cutting out. Now at that point I'm observing 1.5 inches upwards. That's for the back bodies. Remember I said the back bodies will be 1 inch or 1.5 inches higher than the front bodies. So that's exactly what I'm doing here, and I'll cut out the excess I have on the paper out. So having done this, I'll need to set the middle front aside, because basically I'm done with all the contouring I need to do for the front bodies. So on the back bodies, I'll need to mark the lines for the knee line, for the hip line. That's because I'll need to do the contouring as well, and it will need to correspond with that of the front bodies. And because I started with the front body, that's why I'm using the front bodies to mark out all the lines. Now, if you've observed, I've marked 1 inch from the center back. I've marked 1 inch inwards, and I've marked 1/2 inch on the other side. That's for the contouring. And for the dart, I am observing just like I did on the front bodies. From on the waistline, I observe 1/2 inch and I stop 2 inches before the hip line. And below the hip line, I'm observing 2 inches below the hip line. I'll connect it to the knee line. And on the knee line, I'm observing 1/2 inch for the contouring, and I'll connect that to the hem and I'll cut it out just like you can see me do. So on my knee line, just like I said, on the back center line, I observe inwards 1 inch, and that's what I'll be connecting to the hip line. And on that knee line, I'll need to connect it to my hem, and I will leave about 1 inch so that I will use that for the seaming allowance, and from the waistline it will serve as my zipper allowance. And that's the 1 inch I am connecting from the waistline to the hip line to the from the hip line to the knee line, and I'm connecting it to the hem now. And because I want it to be blended, I'm using the curve part of my pattern master to blend that part, and I will use my scissors to cut this out, and that will be for the middle back. So just like I did on the front bodies, I will need to trace out the middle back side contouring. Hope you understand. I'm tracing that out on the side back. Okay. And on the knee line, I will need to extend it, and I'm using 1 inch for the seaming allowance. Now, if you observe this 1 inch, after sewing, all your measurements goes back to what you used and what you added. Okay, there'll be nothing short or nothing more. You have a perfect sewing, tension-free sewing, and perfect fitting. So I'm connecting from the knee line to the flare allowance that I added, and I'll be cutting that out, and that will be for our side back. And all you need to do at this point is just to bring back the pieces together, and then you contour the hem. Now on the hem, I'll be going up with 2 inches. That's because I don't want the flare ankles to be pointing down. Okay, to have a kind of balance, I'll go up with 2 inches and connect it to meet the hem. Now I do this for all the pieces skirt that I have to cut, be it 4 pieces, 6 pieces, even mermaid skirts or airline. Anything that I will look at it and I know it will give me ankles, I will need to contour this part. So having done this, your 8 pieces skirt drafting is done. So remember to subscribe to this channel if you haven't, and turn on your notification button so you won't miss our new videos. And to all my subscribers, I appreciate all of you. Thank you for being here and thank you for watching. I'll see you in my next video.